Dr. Shapiro, I can't begin to thank you for the opportunity of coming today and showing the Frankl film. I guess that it's no exaggeration when I say to you that some of the dearest people in my life are here in this audience today, and also the people who are participating. I've had great opportunities in spite of the fact that I did lose my husband 18 years ago from prostate cancer, and that's how I became acquainted with all of you. Before that, I ran the voluntary agency, the National Genetics Foundation, for 30 years. I can tell you that I wouldn't be here if it were not for one particular person, and that's Kathleen Foley. She took care of my husband, and she believed in me. And she believed that when I went to her and said I wanted to make a film because I had experienced what it means to be an advocate for a patient, and I was very, very eager to be able to understand what all of you are about and how you deal with it when it's in your life. And the first film I made, which goes back in, I started in 1991 at the age of 75, and I'm now 87, and I'm on my fifth film. But I want to tell you that I made a film which is called When Doctors Get Cancer. And that took me on a journey, and Kathy made it possible because she found those physicians who were willing to participate and share their suffering with me. And one of the persons who was in the first film and was very powerful, you're going to hear today, is Dr. Mount from McGill. And we've also had a very exciting journey together. So that they are all my family. In fact, they help my life resonate. And this is the reason that I have pursued this all these years. I must tell you what I believe you wish for, in my mind, most of all, when you really have to face the unbearable, that you can't have a patient, that there's nothing more to be done. We experienced that, and my husband, a week before he died, wanted me to take an oath. And he said to me, I want you to listen carefully. He was a lawyer. And he said, I want you to remember when I'm gone what I've told you. I'm sure that in the treatments that I've had at Stanford and at Memorial, it was a 10-year process. I'm sure there were mistakes. But you see, as a lawyer, I understand mistakes. We all make mistakes. So I want you to promise me when I'm gone that you will never fault them. And he shouted, because I love them. So I believe that he gave you a gift just as you gave to him. And I'm trying to continue on that path and do what I believe is our purpose on earth, to do God's work. And that is the reason that I have made the Frankl film. The Frankl film, for me, is much more for you than even the patients, because the message that he gives us is a new mindset for most of us. We live in a society, particularly in America, where people are so busy doing and rushing that they forget that they are the recipients of a great life. Not only your education, but most of all who you are. And there is no time to stay with that experience. And Viktor shows us how to do this in very, very powerful ways. He has literally changed my life. And the 18 years that I've lived without Jerry, I realized that it is possible to take everything that is unbearable and not only make it bearable, but give back in a very meaningful way that you feel your life is precious every second that you experience it, and that it's your responsibility to be cognizant of your life. It isn't enough to just do what you've learned and how you want to protect the patient. You must have that internal space within you which will give you joy that you share with yourself only. And as a result, you will never burn out, because there will be no way that you will ever find there isn't something new to live for. Whether it's your children, your family, your spouse, life is very rich for all of us, in spite of the troubles that we see in the world today. And I think that Viktor shows us what this is all about. I hope you will find the film interesting. I have used Viktor's own archival footage, which makes the film very real. We have not at any time spoken for what Viktor did not say. I'm very opposed to giving an opinion that would come from a third person. I think that when someone's not here in this world to defend himself, it's not quite right to speak for him. If there's something that you have of his that he said, then I want you to know it. I've also used beautiful music, some of which is really life restoring when you know who it is. And most of all, I have used great sculpture of Henry Moore, which I hope will fascinate you, because it shows us that the creative juices are what make us think of life in our own creative ways. And there is one particular piece of sculpture that I just hope you will try to concentrate on when it is shown. It's an African piece that is in the Rockefeller wing of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And I spent 25 years looking at this man, and I think he's exquisite. He is sick, and has some knobs on the back of him, and he's really brooding over his health. And he was made, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and he's still so alive in what we see. So we're going to let you look at the film, and then I hope you're going to talk to us and tell us really what you think.
Recently, I received a letter from an American student, and I would like to quote just 2 sentences. Dr. Frankl, I'm a 22-year-old with degree, a car, security, and the availability of more sex and power than I need. Now I've only to explain to myself what it all means, what is lacking, what he was missing, what the meaning of whatever he had in the midst of an affluent society. And this feeling of meaninglessness is ever increasing and spreading today, particularly among the youth. It's often associated with a feeling of emptiness, of an inner void, of what I've described in terms of an existential vacuum.
Viktor Frankl was born in Vienna in 1905. This city's beautiful Danube River, with its life energy, has inspired some of our world's greatest composers, poets, and psychoanalysts, including Viktor Frankl. Frankl was an active participant in the psychoanalytical community at the time of Freud. However, world conditions suddenly altered his early professional life when Europe collapsed at the hands of Hitler. Frankl's experience in the concentration camps confirmed to him that one's survival is linked to the individual's capacity to endure suffering. He teaches us the importance of transcending pain even under the most dire conditions. He stresses the need to find meaning in our lives in these complex and difficult times. I'm going to read sections from Frankl's writings as we examine his legacy in the 21st century. Frankl always asked the question, what is man?
I wouldn't subscribe to a sentence included in a letter that Sigmund Freud once wrote to Princess Bonaparte, when he said, at the moment a man doubts or asks the question, what is the value of his life, doubts the meaning of his existence, he is sick. I don't think that he's really sick. I rather think that this is a manifestation of his state of being human, truly human. No ant, no bee, no animal will ever raise the question whether or not its existence has a meaning, but man does. It's his privilege that he cares for a meaning to his existence.
Apart from the pain, what's the hardest part about being sick right now?
I think it's contact with family. It's
Contact with family?
yes, everybody knows the inevitable. Everybody knows that they have to die, and everybody refuses to give in on it, of course. But I think
What does the idea of dying hold for you? What are your thoughts?
well, there again, I suppose, I take the attitude of I hope a lot of people, just looking forward and hoping for the best.
There are three main avenues, as it were, leading up to meaning fulfillment. The first way is through work, through creating a work or doing a deed. Second, through love, through experiencing someone in his very uniqueness, and this means loving. Work and love are the main avenues leading up to meaning. But, if need be, if you are confronted with a fate you no longer can change, say with an incurable disease, with an inoperable cancer, even then you may find a meaning. You may even find the deepest possible, the highest conceivable meaning, because you then have an opportunity to bear witness of the human potential at its best, which is to turn your predicament into an achievement on the human level, to turn a tragedy into a personal triumph.
I became very, very sick at the age of 40. It was a degeneration of my cerebellum with 24 hours a day, dizziness, vertigo, nausea, headache. And I stayed like that for 2 years.
And looking for purpose.
I was reaching 40 years old. My career was okay, my family, but I was realizing 40 was an age I couldn't escape more, to be completely not in contact with myself.
Let's just sit down here. You know, not everybody responds to such a debilitating disease as you have in the spirit that you have, in totally accepting it, and beyond just accepting it, that you're able to actually look upon it now as a gift.
I know.
Bernard arrived at palliative care hoping to die, hoping to be euthanized, suffering so deeply that he just wanted it ended. He couldn't take it anymore. And through a drug regimen, and in particular Dr. Mount, it brought him to a place where he started to have a quality of life. The great paradox of all things, he found tremendous meaning in life. A place to die, and he found life. As a result of the fact that he wasn't going to die, Bernard was shifted to a long-term care facility. Being a long-term care facility, there are Alzheimer's patients that line the corridors. Most of the people are advanced stages of MS or quadriplegics or serious head injuries from car accidents, and here you have this guy with this debilitating degenerative disease that's affecting his body, but his mind and spirit are flying. He's become the resident volunteer himself to this hospital.
A lady I meet the first year I came who looked somebody I could talk and be in relation. Since that time, me and her were brother and sister, and nothing else. And I'm there for her. I love her in the sense of, like, I had that love inside me. I had the same connection with her, and the relation is there, and it will stay.
And you will be with her, you said, until she dies.
Yeah, she asked me to be, because her personality changed so much with that illness that the family don't understand. She's quite alone. C'est ça qui fait que ça s'appelle Salisbury steak. Manja. I had that feeling that it's not heart to heart, it's witness or to witness or something else that we have who touch. And when this happened, this is a real human relation, and this is what I'm interested about right now.
What I call self-transcendence means that man is basically, originally, out to serve a cause greater than himself, or love a person other than himself. In the service for the sake of a cause, in the love for another person, he is actualizing himself in terms of a byproduct and side effect, but not by aiming at it, because this proves to be self-defeating.
Frankl was a psychologist, he was a psychiatrist, he was a philosopher, he was a mountain climber, he was a man of the world, he was a gallivanter, he was a little bit of a playboy, in a sense. He enjoyed life. And as much as he enjoyed, he also was very intense. In other words, everything that he did to the full.
My mother was a descendant of an old established Prague patrician family. Among the ancestors of my mother was Rashi, who lived in the 12th century, and Maharal, the famous High Rabbi Low of Prague. I almost was born in the famous Siller coffee house in Vienna. There, my mother felt the first labor pains on the beautiful spring afternoon of March 26, 1905. My birthday coincides with the day Beethoven died. A schoolmate once commented mischievously, "One mishap comes seldom alone."
As a child of about 3 years of age, I already wished to become a medical doctor. And later on, during adolescence, I also was intrigued by philosophy. So it's understandable that psychiatry, but in particular psychotherapy, offered itself as some sort of a combination, fulfilling both the wishes of mine, and I became a doctor. Then I wanted to be a good doctor. I hope I was no bad doctor. But finally, I wanted to remain a human being in spite of all that. I still try.
I was in the intensive care unit and about to be transferred back to the thoracic ward, and having just had the total esophagectomy, vagotomy and pyloroplasty and splenectomy, and about the third post-operative day, I was approached that morning by 5 or 6 residents who stood 2 to 3 feet away from the end of the bed in a line. Then there was a young resident who approached me tentatively and started to churn out my various blood gases and status. No eye contact, no question about how I was feeling, what I was experiencing. And in the process of his report, he had said, well, he's bleeding rather heavily through his nasogastric tube. Well, that caught my attention, I can tell you. And the chief resident said, well, he's fine, discharge him up to the room. They turned to leave, and one resident said to the other resident, "It's such a shame. I suppose he should have 6 or 7 fairly good months left, though." And that was the conversation. Now, to put it in context, they had to have known I was a physician. And they had to have known I was a colleague and one of the people that had taught them. It was because they had no idea the difference between the biology of disease and experienced illness.
Not only was it a diagnosis of cancer, I was in stage 4. My prognosis was 6 months. However, I consented to chemo, which gave me about 25% chance of survival. And they decided on very heavy-duty chemo. My world collapsed. I was going to die. I didn't think that I would survive it. I spoke to somebody when I was in a crisis, and she suggested that she would call Dr. Bell, and he would see me for consultation one time. I was totally depleted. I didn't think I could carry on with any more chemo. I went to see him, and 3 hours later, after talking to him, and he validated me as a person and made me feel very comfortable.
A person I'm seeing who has advanced cancer, who frequently is experiencing very severe symptoms, and if she's upset or anxious or anguished, her symptoms are out of control. And by the time we've been talking and chatting, and I've been listening, and we've been interacting, and I've been learning from her, she says, you know, it's just the strangest thing. That headache is gone. And my fingers, my legs don't pain anymore.
And that went on for 2 years, where a lot of healing took place. A lot of feelings around how I felt about myself. I always felt that I wasn't good enough or smart enough, and he helped me through it. I read Frankl's book, Search for Meaning, 3 times, I think, in my life. And I really could relate. When I read the book again now, I picked out a few phrases. I think Nietzsche said, "He who has a will to live can bear almost anyhow." And I could relate to that. I probably had a will to live. That's why I was able to go on.
Sufferings born with courage and dignity, you remember? So if you shoulder this fate, any Christian would say, you take your cross upon yourselves with courage and dignity, you not only may squeeze out meaning even of such a terrible event, but even reach the highest possible level of meaning. Because, you see, doing a deed, creating a word, as Frankl is used to enumerate, or experiencing or something, or loving someone, okay, but born such a fate with dignity, this is something extraordinary. This is the highest ranking value or meaning.
In 1937, I opened my private practice as a specialist in neurology and psychiatry. I was also head of the Department of Neurology at the Polyclinic in Vienna. It was at the hospital that I met my first wife, Tilly Grosser. She was a station nurse. Of course, I was impressed by Tilly's beauty, but her character was the real deciding factor. Her natural intuition, her understanding heart. A few months after I opened my practice in March 1938, Hitler's troops marched into Austria. It seemed that everything was jinxed. It was impossible to get a visa for any country. However, when I was offered the chief of neurology position at Rothschild Hospital, I accepted it. The post afforded me and my aging parents a measure of protection from deportation to the concentration camps. I had to wait for years until my quota number came up, by which I would be permitted to emigrate to the United States. Finally, shortly before Pearl Harbor, I was asked to come to the American consulate to pick up my visa.
After all, this means that when I'm away, no longer the head of the department, no longer able to protect my parents, could be within a couple of weeks sent to some extermination camp. Although they were overjoyed, assuming that within a couple of weeks I will emigrate to the United States, then I hesitated.
Undecided, I left home, took a walk, and had this thought. Isn't this the kind of situation that requires some hint from heaven? When I returned home, my eyes fell on a little piece of marble lying on the table. "What's this?" I asked my father. "This? Oh, I picked it out of the rubble at the synagogue they've burned down. It has on it part of the 10 Commandments. I can even tell you from which commandment it comes. There is only one commandment that uses the letter that is chiseled here. And that is?" I asked eagerly.
And he answered, "Honor father and mother, and you will stay in the land." Thereupon I immediately acknowledged this and made the decision to remain in the land, to stay with my parents, and let the visa lapse on the next day. I didn't go to the consulate. Now, all of you are fully entitled to say, "Dr. Frankl, this is just some sort of a projective test. because you just projected a decision you had made in the depth of your heart already long before to remain in Austria, in Vienna, with your parents. Okay, but then I asked the respective person, what about some guy who would have seen in that piece of marble nothing but calcium carbonate, which is the chemical formula for marble? Is this not a projective test? Yes, but it would have projected into this stone his own existential vacuum, his inner meaninglessness and emptiness. Thank you. Of course, from one day to the next, everything changed. The three of us were deported to various concentration camps. My father died in Theresienstadt. My mother went directly from the railway station of Auschwitz into a gas chamber. And myself, after entering Auschwitz, had a full-length book manuscript in my pocket, in the pocket of my overcoat, and everything was taken away, of course.
I'm convinced that I owe my survival, among other things, to my resolve to reconstruct the lost manuscript. As far as I was concerned, I felt duty-bound toward my mother to stay alive. We two loved one another beyond all else. Therefore, my life had a meaning in spite of everything. And so I made a pact with heaven. If I should have to die, then let my death preserve my mother's life. And whatever I should have to suffer, up until the time of my death, was to purchase for her a sweet and easy death when her time came. Only by imagining in terms of such sacrifice was my tormented existence endurable. I could live my life only if it had a meaning. But I also wanted to suffer my suffering and die my death only if suffering and death also had a meaning. I remember marching one morning from the camp to the worksite, hardly able to bear the hunger, the cold, and the pain of my frozen and festering feet. My mind clung to my wife's image, imagining it with an uncanny acuteness. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, her look was then more luminous than the sun, which was beginning to rise. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. I spent a total of 3 years in 4 camps: Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Kaufering, and Turkheim. I survived.
Putting ourselves in the position of Viktor Frankl, I think the first thing that he would say is, don't wait until the end of life. If you're going to do transforming not for the sake of at a certain juncture, but address yourself to the simple, fundamental question, what is the meaning of life? What is the meaning for you? What are the things that are important to you? And don't wait for when it's an emergency and you have no other alternative, because then you're dealing with the situation under pressure. Rather than doing it under pressure, do it when you're relaxed. Ask yourself the serious questions of what is important in life, so that when it comes to the end, which we're all going to have to go through, it won't necessitate a transformation. You'll be able to go into that stage of life naturally.
He saw it as such a grace that he survived the concentration camp. And the meaning of surviving the camp for him was to be open to all people, to help other people if they are in a struggle. He thought it was the meaning of surviving the concentration camp, that now, the rest of his life, he must help other people in need. And I must say he has done this up to his last moment.
The most precious story about him is one that I recall of a woman who called him in the middle of the night saying that she wanted to commit suicide. And of course you can understand that Frankl said suicide is anathema. You know, you think about unconditional meaningfulness of life in any circumstances, no matter how miserable it is, there's got to be something there that's pulling you. Somebody out there that you can love, some cause that you can embrace. There's got to be there something for you. He tried every single argument under the book. He said goodbye to her, not knowing what was going to happen. A few days later, he's in his office, and a lady comes knocking, and Frankl was delighted that she was still alive. So, of course, the scientist in him said, what argument was it that I gave to you that convinced you not to jump? So she gave him a most profound answer. She said, look, no argument that you gave to me was the thing that convinced me not to commit suicide. You know what convinced me not to commit suicide? That I called a famous busy man at 3 o'clock in the morning. That at no point in our conversation did he berate me for waking him up. He spent a half an hour trying to convince me that life is full of meaning. Life has to have some meaning.
Beethoven is such a good example of that. Beethoven, when he was in his late 20s or early 30s, found he was getting deaf, contemplated suicide, and he wrote that amazing testament discussing his thoughts of ending his life. But he didn't, coming back to Viktor Frankl, because he felt he had something more to do. He had a meaning. God, if he had died, we wouldn't have the late quartets. Ultimate masterpieces of the end of his life. Expressions of transcendent spirituality.
Suicide not only makes it impossible for a person to grow and to mature as a result of his own sufferings, but it also makes it impossible for him to make up for the suffering he may have inflicted on someone else.
Mr. A is a 74-year-old gentleman who has prostate cancer from 1997. He's now comfortable, which was our short-term goal. Now the long-term goal is getting him home. I'm not sure that his wife is really capable of coping.
In fact, I did mention to him with his wife present that, you know, he's looking good, maybe we'll get you out of here in a few days. She sort of chased me down the corridor and said, well, you know, wait a second, I don't know if... what do you mean? She was basically saying she's really had it. She's been overstressed. She's lost 20 pounds. She doesn't know how she'd be able to cope with it. So we started to see at that time that maybe this is going to take a little bit of a team effort as to how to proceed with him.
She also, though, said that over the last few days, as his symptoms were improving physically, he had started to be more down. She felt that he really, truly was suffering in a different way than physically, and she was having a very hard time witnessing that in the room. And he had begun to talk about wanting to die. It was no longer the physical suffering, but a sense of real lack of meaning in his life, and that he had nothing left to offer to his 2 sons or to his wife.
When a patient says, if I can't go home, I'd rather die, for me, I hear, if I can't go home inside. I feel that this man has never had a chance maybe to contact the inner part of himself, the invisible. And that being said, in 10% of the people who come to share with me about their suffering, they will mention either euthanasia or in other ways, why should I live for longer, as far as the patient would mention, and the families would say, why would I witness so much suffering?
When Manny and I first went in the room, this was a man who said, I want to die. He presented this as a competent accountant who was telling us the facts. We're comfortable with this. I want my life to end. My wife and I have discussed it, and that's the situation. And it's chilling to realize that had he been in Holland this week and last week, he would now be dead. And it's just that simple. The next point is that were we to use terminal sedation when we don't know what we should do next, or where we're feeling uncomfortable, or where they say there's no meaning in things, or I'm having no quality of life, then he would be being sedated now. And it took the assessment of a really good team to see that, in fact, the issue for this man was he was in an existential vacuum. So I said to him, well, it doesn't strike me that you're someone who wants to die. It strikes me that you're someone who enjoys living. And I then commented that it seemed to me, after his very productive professional life, and after bringing up 2 sons and being a productive member of society, that what he was asking for was a safe place for this time of his life, where he could have some dignity and not feel a burden. And he started to cry. And he said, yes, that's exactly what he wanted. And I said, well, it seems to me that if as a society we can't help with that, then we've let you down in a primary way. And the fact is, these are people who now have the possibility of experiencing quality time together, and it may give them time for some important reconciliation, whether he realizes it or not.
It shows how much, I think, in society, the message we get is be productive, be healthy, be in your roles, and when you're there, you're a person, and you're someone, and we're proud of you. If you do fall sick, if you're not playing any role, what I hear is like, I'm nobody, as if the body was running away, and then there is nobody there. So we need, I think, to reconstruct a sense of a self from deep inside. And then I guess the team here, that's why we're there for, to give that sense of being a person totally until the end, and not only a wounded person all the way. There is a part that does not have cancer, and we need to sort of focus on the part that is intact also. They don't know that if no one says that.
You have to make an ascent, and then you are doomed to making the descent. Nobody can remain on a peak. He has to go down sooner or later to the valley. But what is important is to know that there are peaks, and during these peaks we become aware of the infinite meaningfulness or bliss of being. And this is important not only to know, but to tell our patients suffering from the existential vacuum. They are blind toward meanings and values, and must know that they are just blind, but meanings and values still exist, because it's the same with the sun. If there's cloudy weather, we know that the sun still exists. gray hair, my age, I started taking flying lessons recently. Do you know what my flying instructor told me? If you are starting here, wish to get here, say east, heading for this, and you have a crosswind, you will drift and you will land here. So you have to do what we pilots call crabbing, he told me, C-R-A-B, crabbing. You have to head for north of this airfield. If you are heading here above this airfield, then you will actually land here. But if you head for here, you are landing here. This holds also for man, I would say. If we take man as he really is, we make him worse. But if we overestimate him, it's premature, your applause, you will soon know why. If we seem to be idealists and are overestimating, overrating man, and looking at him that high, here above, you know what happens? We promote him to what he really can be. So we have to be idealists in a way, because then we'll wind up as the true, the real realists. And you know who has said this? If we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. This was not my flight instructor, this was not me, this was Goethe. He said this verbally.
Even at that early age, I had developed two basic ideas. First, it is not we who should ask for the meaning of life, since it is we who are being asked. It is we ourselves who must answer the questions that life asks of us. And to these questions, we can respond only by being responsible for our existence. The other basic idea I developed maintains that ultimate meaning is and must remain beyond our comprehension. There exists something I have called super meaning, but not in the sense of something supernatural. In this, we can only believe. In this, we must believe. Even if only unconsciously, essentially, we all do believe in it.
Meaning can be found by each and every person, irrespective of his age, irrespective of his sex, irrespective of his educational background, irrespective of his IQ, irrespective of his personal character, structure, or psychological makeup, irrespective of environment. Just think of Auschwitz, of prisons, and of the people who are very successful and yet bored. And finally, it turned out that meaning is available to man in principle, irrespective of whether or not he is religious, and if he is religious, to which denomination he belongs.
The reason we're all here today is cancer. 3 of us have had cancer ourselves, so in its own way, cancer has been good to us in that we've lived to tell the story about it. Davy, you, because it was 8 years ago,
It was.
Could I ask you what it was like to just to get the impact even of the diagnosis?
I went through the treatment, surgery, chemotherapy, and just put one foot in front of the other at each juncture, and got through it.
I was nervous about it. Of course, it's different when you have the disease in your own family and when you're dealing with it in other people, but you'll learn a lot from that experience. I think that I deal better with patients now because of the fact that I've gone through it and you've gone through it. In fact, your having gone through it made it easier for me. I think I learned a lot about myself in the process, and about my family, and where support comes from and what's important to me.
Even in a situation where you have no freedom at all, including the freedom of choice, the freedom of decision, you always, and any human being always retains, up to the last moment of his life, up to the last breath of himself, retains the freedom to choose the attitude toward that tragic situation.
I guess I tried while I was going through it to make something out of a bad situation. I kept on teaching all through the experience of the chemotherapy. I played golf. I did everything that I could to have some semblance of my normal life, even in the midst of the treatments and the surgery. I think it's really, in a sense, invigorated my existence. And I think I've made an effort to live my life since that time with more of a feeling that I want to make decisions now that are important and follow through on them, not wait 5 years to do something.
Bruce, when you had your own cancer, you were quick to return to work with the patients, and I wondered, what was your own reaction?
I'm different than Davey. I tend not to do new things. I wanted to get back to the old things. And so I was just chomping at the bit to get out of the house and get back to work. I haven't made any great changes in my life. I mean, she makes the change.
Well,
we just want to know.
Okay. I'll continue with the thought. I thought the process of recovering from this was going to be faster, in a sense, just dealing with it emotionally. And it turns out that the physical recovery is really much quicker than the emotional part of it.
What is man? We have learned to know him as possibly no generation before us. We have learned to know him in camps, where everything unessential had been stripped from man, where everything which a person had, money, power, fame, luck, disappeared, while only that remained which a man does not have, but which he must be. What remained was man himself, who in the white heat of suffering and pain was melted down to the essentials, to the human in himself. He is a being who continuously decides what he is, a being who equally harbors the potential to descend to the level of an animal or ascend to the life of a saint. This, then, is man. We now have an answer to the question which we put to ourselves in the beginning. What is man, that you are mindful of him? He is a reed, said Pascal, but a reed which thinks. And it is this thinking, this consciousness, this responsibility that constitute the dignity of man. The dignity of each individual human being. And it is always to be ascribed to the individual person, whether he preserves this dignity or tarnishes it.